Hey guys, tonight we're crawling into a straw-stuffed bed inside a drafty medieval cottage. You hear the creak of old beams above you, the slow groan of wind pressing through the thatched roof, and the occasional grunt of a pig sleeping just a few feet away. The fire's dying down. You're wrapped in scratchy wool, half praying not to roll onto a beetle. Welcome to the Middle Ages. You're not just trying to fall asleep, you're doing it the weird medieval way. Because see, back then, people didn't exactly go to bed and sleep 8 hours straight. That's modern luxury. In the medieval world, folks often slept in 2 shifts, the first sleep and the second sleep, with a mysterious, quiet period of wakefulness sandwiched between. You might spend that eerie middle time praying, reflecting, or, complaining about how cold your toes are. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, comment with your city and local time. I want to know who's falling asleep in a bamboo hut in Vietnam, and who's dozing off in a rainy cottage in Yorkshire. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's evening now. You've spent the day plowing fields, hauling water, or maybe boiling something suspicious over a smoky hearth. The air inside your home is thick with soot, the floor dirt-packed, and the only light is flickering from a single tallow candle. You yawn, stretch, and wait, it's not bedtime yet. Not really. See, unlike the modern sleep marathon, the average medieval night was more of a relay. You'd crawl into bed not long after sunset, especially during the long winter months, and drift into what was called your first sleep. This phase might last from around 9 p.m. to midnight or a bit later. Your body settles in quickly. After all, you've been working hard since sunrise. During this first sleep, you descend into deep slumber. And weirdly, everyone knew about this structure. People even had names for it. Primum somnum in Latin, or simply Firsta Slep in Middle English. Some doctors of the time believed that it was the healthiest portion of your night's rest, where your body purged vapors and reset the humors. Yes, those pesky bodily fluids everyone was obsessed with. Then, like clockwork, you'd wake up. Maybe your eyes flutter open on their own. Or maybe the fire's gone out and the chill has wormed its way through the wool layers wrapped around you. Maybe someone next to you mumbles or shifts. You're now in the watch, a liminal stretch of wakefulness in the dead of night. Historians still argue whether this waking period was natural or a product of environmental pressures, like the absence of artificial lighting and the rigid schedule of agrarian life. But whatever the cause, people leaned into it. They expected to wake in the night. It wasn't insomnia, it was just night things. So what do you do during this midnight pause? You don't scroll TikTok. You might poke the fire back to life, warm your hands, maybe walk outside to check on the animals. Some took this time to relieve themselves, carefully navigating dark halls or muddy yards to reach the latrine or chamber pot. More on that mess later. But often, this time was used for prayer, quiet contemplation, or even romance. Yep. There are records of husbands and wives whispering together under the covers during this watch. Some even claimed this hour was ideal for conceiving children. Because, God probably schedules fertility windows around 2 a.m. Other folks might read scripture if they were literate and wealthy enough to own candles and books. More likely, someone in a monastery might chant a few lines of psalms before rolling over for the second stretch. Eventually, you'd crawl back into bed. The second sleep, usually from 1 or 2 a.m. until dawn, was lighter, dreamier. You'd often wake from this phase with vivid dreams. Some believed these carried divine messages or ominous signs. Spoiler, most dreams involved fish, storms, or being chased by wolves. But here's a fringe tidbit. Some scholars argue that these split sleep patterns helped people better process emotions and consolidate memories. Like nature gave them a half-time break in their REM cycle. Modern experiments simulating pre-industrial sleep have even found similar effects. So imagine yourself now, wrapped in coarse wool blankets that itch more than they warm, lying next to someone snoring slightly. Your feet are cold, your nose colder. The fire's just embers now. You've had your first sleep. You've sat in the still silence of midnight, maybe whispered a small prayer. Now you pull the covers tighter and wait for the second sleep to carry you gently toward morning. And weirdly, it works. But just know, you probably wouldn't survive this every night. Without blackout curtains, mattresses, or noise machines, medieval life, sleep was patchy, drafty, and disturbingly full of rodents. Still, for millions of people, this was normal. And maybe as you start to drift off here tonight, there's something soothing about that. You lying there with the echo of a 12th century monk's breath in the silence, just waiting for second sleep to arrive. The fire's down to glowing coals, the room smells faintly of smoke and damp wool, and just as you're about to doze back into second sleep, the person next to you shifts, hard. Their elbow knocks into your ribs. You grunt, roll away, straight into someone else's knees. Welcome to the shared bed. In the medieval world, you're almost never sleeping alone. Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, merchant or monk. Unless you're wildly lucky or particularly antisocial, you're probably sharing your bed with at least one other human being. Often several. Possibly some you've never even met. Let that sink in. The idea of having your own room for sleeping is a rare luxury, bordering on mythical. Privacy in the modern sense just isn't a thing. Bedrooms are communal. Beds are oversized hay pallets or frames with rope supports, and they're packed with bodies. Siblings, cousins, guests, traveling friars, or even hired help. And everyone's just dealing with it. Now, this doesn't mean it's a constant cuddle puddle. No one's trying to spoon the blacksmith's apprentice. You mostly keep to your side or your half or whatever sliver you can manage. But you can't ignore the heat, the noise, the smell. All of it is as much a part of your sleeping environment as your blanket. And here's the kicker. People didn't even see this as weird. Sharing beds was practical, economical, and considered totally normal, even honorable. In some legal contexts, bed sharing was used to signify trust. In inns, strangers were paired off and assigned to beds without much fuss. The innkeeper might point to a mattress and go, "You two? There." No refunds. Travelers called this practice hotbedding, and it wasn't exclusive to peasants. Even high-ranking clergy and scholars would share sleeping quarters during journeys or in monasteries. There are letters between bishops complaining about someone snoring or elbowing. Very human stuff. One particularly quirky example? In medieval universities, students were often required to share not just a room, but a bed with their assigned roommate. Why? Because it saved space, sure, but also because it discouraged them from sneaking off to taverns. Or worse, brothels. A roommate is cheaper than a moral chaperone. Historians still argue whether bed sharing was more about economy or custom, but either way, it shaped the rhythm of medieval sleep. If someone tossed and turned, you tossed and turned. If someone had a nightmare, everyone knew. If someone got up to use the chamber pot, you guessed it, you were briefly, unpleasantly awake too. And don't even think about secret nighttime snacks. Any chewing noise was met with side eyes and muttered curses, especially in monasteries where silence was sacred and nighttime was for rest, not munching dried apples under the covers. In peasant homes, things could get even more crowded. One mattress might hold an entire nuclear family. Parents at one end, kids at the other, maybe a baby wedged somewhere in between like a poorly placed bread roll. And beds weren't necessarily in bedrooms. Often they were in the main room of the house, right next to the hearth and maybe just a few feet from the animals. There's a story from a 14th century French village where a family of 6, plus a piglet and a dog, slept on the same straw mat, with the mother complaining that the dog took up the warmest spot. Relatable. For nobles, the situation was slightly different, but still weird by modern standards. Yes, they had more room, and yes, their beds were fancier. Huge wooden frames, towering feather mattresses, curtains for warmth and privacy. But they still shared beds, often with attendants, guards, or guests. If a foreign dignitary came to visit, you might offer them your own bed to sleep beside you as a gesture of respect. Weird flex, but okay. In fact, royal bedchambers were semi-public spaces. Kings didn't just sleep there. They held private meetings, received important visitors, and sometimes even dictated policy while lounging in bed like oversized pajamaed raccoons. And now for a little-known tidbit, the phrase sleep tight, that comes from how beds were constructed. Instead of slats, they used rope lattices to support mattresses. These had to be tightened regularly to keep the bed firm. So, if you're lucky, your bedmate might help you tighten the ropes before flopping down next to you. Or not. Maybe they're already asleep and snoring. Speaking of which, snoring? Huge problem. Medieval medicine had some interesting theories. Some believed it was caused by phlegmatic imbalance, or that your soul was trying to escape through your throat. Others just hit you with a pillow until you shut up. If the person next to you was particularly gassy or twitchy, you might politely suggest a shift change, or roll them onto their side using a strategically placed log. Yes, a literal log, used like a sleepy medieval spooning aid. That's not even the weirdest part. In some parts of Europe, couples were put to bed during marriage ceremonies in front of witnesses, including clergy, parents, and a few nosy neighbors. This wasn't voyeuristic. Okay, not entirely. It was to confirm the marriage was legitimate. After all, if you slept together, it counted. Meanwhile, back in your shared bed, someone's foot has found its way under your knee. You grunt, shift, tug the wool blanket back toward your corner. A mouse scurries across the rafters above. Someone whispers a quick, Ave Maria, and slowly, the bed creaks into silence again. No one complains. Not really. You're used to it. You've grown up like this, learned how to fold your limbs, how to block out the rhythm of another person's breath, how to accept the occasional elbow in your side without a fight. Because in this world, sleep isn't solitary. It's shared, communal, unavoidable, and maybe, just maybe, there's something kind of warm in that. Your sleep has been fitful. Someone rolled over and took most of the blanket. Someone else muttered nonsense in their sleep, probably dreaming about fish stew again. The room is cool now, a damp sort of chill curling under the door. And you? You're still fully dressed? No, seriously. You didn't change into pajamas because pajamas aren't a thing yet. Not for most people. You're sleeping in your day clothes. Maybe you loosened your belt or removed your outer tunic, but chances are you're still wearing at least 1 or 2 layers, including your linen undergarments, a rough woolen shift, and maybe even a cloak thrown over for warmth. And of course, if you're lucky or noble or just cold enough, you're wearing a nightcap. Yes, an actual hat. For sleeping. Fashionable? Not really. Necessary? Absolutely, with no central heating, drafty windows, and stone or wattle walls that do nothing to keep warmth in. Heat is a luxury. You cover your head to trap it. The nightcap becomes as essential as your blanket. For some folks, it's just a rectangle of fabric tied under the chin. Others get fancy with embroidered ones, tassels dangling like sleepy little flags of wealth. You might chuckle, thinking nightcaps are silly, but let's talk about how people used to believe in night air. Not just the cold, but the idea that the air itself after dark could cause illness. People bundled up tight against what they called the miasma, the belief that bad smells and invisible night vapors could sneak into your nose and ruin your health. So yeah, wearing a hat to bed made you feel like you were fighting off evil air spirits. Practical and paranoid. And if you're wondering about sheets, well, only the wealthier households had proper linens. Most peasants slept on bear straw, sometimes covered with a single rough blanket or worn-out cloak. No thread count here. And forget about fluffy duvets. If your bedding didn't scratch your skin, you were probably dreaming. Let's talk about layers. In monasteries, monks often slept in full robes. sometimes tied tight with a rope belt, sometimes not even removing their shoes. The thinking was that sleep should not tempt the flesh. In other words, don't get too cozy. Heaven forbid comfort lead you to sinful thoughts. Historians still argue whether monks always kept their habits on while sleeping, but we know that humility and restraint were priorities. In some orders, even the idea of individual bedding was frowned upon. You were supposed to remember your place, not just in the monastery, but in the grand hierarchy of the universe. Meanwhile, in more well-to-do homes, you might have a linen chemise or a nightshirt, something a little lighter than daytime garb. But even these were often repurposed garments, not outfits designated solely for sleeping. Fun fringe fact: there are medieval references to bedgowns, which were essentially cozy garments for lounging around before bed. Think of them as the great-great-grandparents of today's bathrobe, only way less fluffy, and probably smelled faintly of barley soup. But warmth wasn't just about clothes. You needed heat, and fire didn't always cut it. So you might reach for a warming pan, a shallow metal dish filled with hot coals, passed between the sheets before bedtime. That is, if you were rich enough to own one. Used properly, it made the bed toasty. Used poorly, it set the bed on fire. Sleep tight. There's even evidence that people would warm bricks, wrap them in cloth, and slide them into bed like primitive hot water bottles. If you've ever hugged a laptop on a cold night, you get the vibe. But for the vast majority of medieval folks, the body was the best heater available, which is probably why so many people slept fully dressed and close together. You were the radiator, whether you liked it or not. Now let's zoom in for a moment. Picture yourself curled in a ball on a wooden platform, wrapped in a faded blanket. Your tunic is stiff with yesterday's sweat. Your legs are cold from the knees down, and there's a chilly draft worming its way under the door. You pull your cap lower over your ears. It's scratchy, but better than nothing. Your clothes double as pajamas, your cloak doubles as a blanket, and your body heat is doing the heavy lifting. And let's not forget the hygiene element. Clothes weren't washed often. People believed that bathing too much could open the pores and let disease in. So, you wore your clothes for days, sometimes weeks at a time, which means you slept in them, sweat in them, and probably dreamed in them too. If you were a servant, you might sleep in a corner of the kitchen, curled up near the dying embers of the hearth. No privacy, no bed, maybe a few sacks of grain as your pillow. If you were a farmhand, you might sleep in the barn itself, fully dressed, hat on, maybe boots still on too. Why? Because getting undressed took time, and in a pinch you might need to run out in the middle of the night to chase off thieves, wolves, or something weirder. In cold months, sleep was about survival, not comfort. And even in summer, nights could be chilly. You layered up. You wore what you had. No flannel pajama sets, no fuzzy socks, no cute matching sleepwear for Instagram stories. Although, let's be honest, if medieval people had Instagram, they'd definitely post aesthetic bedtime with the goats selfies. But comfort wasn't the point. Sleep was something you did when the work was done, when the light failed, when your body finally gave out. It wasn't a ritual of scented candles and chamomile tea. It was the final collapse of a body that had hauled buckets, chopped wood, stirred soup, and prayed its way through 12 full hours of existence. Still, there's something deeply human about wrapping yourself in what little warmth you have, pulling the nightcap low and letting sleep come as it will. So here you are, lying fully clothed, hat slightly askew, wrapped in a blanket that smells like barley and old wool. Someone nearby coughs. The wind rattles the shutters. Your feet are cold. And slowly, slowly the world fades to black. You awaken. Not because you're well rested, but because something just grunted. Loudly. You freeze. Not a dream. There it is again. A low, snorting sort of sigh just beneath the bed. And then it hits you. Oh, right. The animals are sleeping here too. This isn't a weird exception. It's normal. In medieval homes, especially among peasants and smallholders, it was common, expected even, to sleep with the animals. Not just the family dog curled adorably at your feet, but Cows, pigs, chickens, goats. The whole barnyard, right under your nose. Why? Because animals were valuable. They were warmth, they were security, they were income. A single pig could feed a family through the winter. A few hens meant steady eggs. A cow, now that was wealth on legs. You didn't leave them outside to freeze or get stolen. You brought them in, into the same structure where you slept, ate, and lived. Let's break it down. Many medieval peasant homes were what we'd now call longhouses. These were simple one-room or two-room structures with humans on one side and animals on the other. Maybe there was a waist-high wooden partition separating you from the livestock. Maybe, if you were lucky. More often, it was just a change in flooring, from packed dirt to straw or mud, that told you where the humans ended and the cows began. You might drift off to sleep with the gentle, rhythmic chewing of a donkey behind your head, or be jolted awake when a restless pig decided to shuffle in its pen. Chickens clucked softly through the night. Sometimes they'd hop into the rafters to roost, raining down little gifts by morning. Sounds gross? It kind of was. But it also made sense. Animals gave off body heat, which was incredibly helpful in drafty, uninsulated homes. A full-grown cow gives off a surprising amount of warmth, like a low-effort space heater that occasionally mooed. Sleeping near them was a survival tactic, not a lifestyle choice. And besides, your nose kind of got used to it. Historians still argue whether the average medieval person was as nose-blind to the smells as we think. Some say people just had a different threshold for gross. Others suggest they were constantly airing things out when they could, or burning herbs to cut the scent. But whatever the case, there's no denying. Sleeping next to livestock was just part of the deal. And this wasn't just a rural practice. Even small-town households often kept animals inside. Chickens might nest under the stairs. A goose might guard the door like a feathered watchdog. They're actually terrifying when angry. There's even documentation of traveling merchants bringing animals into inns with them. Imagine checking into a roadside hostel, and the guy next to you ties up his goat at the foot of the bed like a medieval emotional support animal. Now, if you were lucky enough to be a noble or live in a wealthier household, things were a little different. Stables were separate, usually, but even then, animals might not be far. Hunting dogs slept in halls or chambers. Falcons were kept on perches indoors. Horses and hawks were part of your identity. They didn't get left out in the cold like common chickens. Let's zoom back into your reality. You're lying on a straw mattress. There's a chicken nesting nearby. A small goat occasionally bleats in its sleep. You're so used to the sounds that silence would be more unsettling. The pig behind the partition snores like a blacksmith with sinus problems. And then there's the smell. Let's not dance around it. It stinks. The mixture of animal waste, damp straw, smoke from the hearth, and unwashed bodies creates what some chroniclers euphemistically called a rich, earthy aroma. But this is your world. This is your sleep environment. You roll over, trying not to breathe too deeply. Your feet are still cold. There's a faint squish under your bed. Better not investigate. Let's hit a quirky side note. There were medieval beliefs about animals affecting dreams. Some people thought the presence of certain animals could ward off evil spirits or even improve your sleep. Cats, especially, were believed to guard the soul while it traveled in dreams. Also, they caught mice, which was a bonus. On the flip side, sleeping too close to animals, especially pigs, was sometimes considered spiritually risky. There are medical texts warning that the humors of a pig might affect your own. This pseudoscience concluded that inhaling the wrong animal vapors could mess with your health or give you nightmares. Still, people did it anyway. Comfort trumped superstition more often than you'd think. Back in your cottage, the fire has gone out. The room is shadowy and gray with early dawn light. A sheep sneezes. A mouse scurries across the floorboards. Someone stirs on the other side of the room. You lie still, listening to the symphony of animal breath. It's weirdly soothing in its own rustic way. Your world is alive, even in sleep. You're never truly alone, not in body, not in sound. And while we now have noise machines that play artificial forest sounds, here, the real forest is trying to climb through the cracks in your wall. The animals are the white noise. They breathe with you, snore with you, dream beside you. It's not glamorous, it's not quiet, but it is warm. And that's all that matters when the night stretches long and the cold seeps in. So, you pull the scratchy blanket tighter. Curl in closer to the warmth of your bedmate. Goat, person, or both. And drift off again, nose deep in hay, with the comfort of knowing at least someone else in the room is likely to wake up before the wolves arrive. You jolt awake because something sharp just poked you in the lower back. No, it's not your bedmate's elbow, it's the bed itself. More precisely, it's a rogue piece of straw. Because tonight, like every other night in your medieval life, you're sleeping on a straw mattress. If we can even call it that, without offending modern mattresses everywhere. It's really more of a sack. A big, lumpy, rustling sack of hay or straw stuffed into rough fabric, sometimes linen, often burlap. And it squeaks every time you shift. Welcome to your medieval bed. Let's break it down. If you're a commoner, your mattress is a pallet, also called a tick. A sack filled with straw, hay, rushes, or even moss if you're desperate. The contents flatten fast, compress into clumps, and yes, attract bugs. Mites. Fleas. All the cozy crawlies you definitely didn't invite. Cleaning? Sure, you could empty the tick, beat it out, refill it with fresh stuffing, but let's be honest, you probably won't get around to it for a few months, maybe longer. You've got plowing to do, bread to bake, and sheep to shear. Hygiene is a slow-moving suggestion at best, and those fleas? Yeah, they're basically part of the family now. This is the era before germ theory, before bedbug exterminators, before steam cleaners. If you're scratching in your sleep, that's just medieval ambiance. The wealthy? Oh, they had feather beds, literally. Linen sacks filled with goose feathers, layered atop rope frames that needed to be tightened regularly. Sleep tight wasn't just a cute saying, it was practical advice. These beds were softer, sure, but also notorious for gathering dust and attracting lice. So, luxury with consequences. Some noble households even stacked mattresses. Feather on top, straw below, over a rope or wooden frame. Add bed curtains to trap in warmth and shut out drafts, and you've got a royal sleep setup. Just ignore the fact that those fancy brocaded curtains rarely got washed and might harbor an entire ecosystem. Fun fringe tidbit? In some households, bed bugs were so common they became part of nighttime prayers. Lord, guard me from the demons and the crawlers both. That's not a joke. That's survival. Now you might wonder, what about pillows? Well, if you were poor, probably not. Or if you had one, it was a rag stuffed with more straw. Or maybe a folded-up cloak. Richer folks had bolsters. Long, sausage-shaped cushions stuffed with wool, feathers, or occasionally, get this, herbs. Lavender, rose petals, and mugwort were popular, believed to encourage sleep and ward off evil spirits. Of course, that's assuming you could afford herbs for anything besides soup. Historians still argue whether medieval pillows were everyday items or luxury goods, but surviving inventories show pillows popping up in both peasant wills and noble homes. What changes is the quality. A peasant's pillow might have smelled like mildew. A noble's might have had embroidery and a family crest. As for bed frames, most peasants didn't have one. They slept on platforms raised just enough to stay off the damp ground. Or on benches, or near the hearth, curled against the fading heat of the coals. But wealthier households had canopy beds, often carved from oak or walnut with curtains for privacy, warmth, and the not-so-small matter of blocking insects and rats from falling on your face while you slept. Yes, that was a thing. Let's take a moment to address the rats. They're there. In the walls, in the rafters, occasionally on your blanket, especially if there's food nearby. And there's always food nearby. Crumbs. Bits of old bread. A stray sausage stub from dinner. You try not to think about it as you pull your blanket over your ears and hope they're more interested in the pig droppings outside. But you're used to it. After all, your straw mattress smells like, well, straw, and a little like feet, and a lot like sweat. But it's what you've got. There's even a whole etiquette of straw. Changing it out too frequently was seen as fussy. Letting it rot was dangerous, and good quality straw, like rye or wheat straw, was more comfortable and lasted longer than oat straw, which turned mushy quickly. If you were thrifty and lucky, you might mix in dried herbs to keep pests away. If you were desperate, you just slept on whatever you could. Scrounge. Now imagine it. You turn over and your back crinkles against dry straw. Your hip hits a hard lump, probably a clump of hay. Your ear rests against a pillow that's gone flat in the middle but overstuffed on the sides. Someone nearby is snoring. Something above is scratching. You tug the blanket tighter. You could, in theory, get up and adjust the mattress. Maybe beat it with a stick. Shake it out, redistribute the stuffing. But it's 3 a.m., your feet are frozen, and there's a decent chance that a spider has already claimed squatter's rights under the bed. So you sigh and settle back in. The crinkle of straw is oddly soothing, in a way that only someone raised in it could appreciate. Now let's detour for a moment to the world of travel beds. You're on the road. You can't pack a mattress. So what do? Easy, you bring a roll of bedding, sometimes called a bedroll or blanket roll. Soldiers, merchants, pilgrims, all carried some version. Usually it included a blanket, maybe a small pad of straw, and a cloak. You'd find a dry patch of ground and unroll it like a medieval sleeping bag. Bonus points if you used a saddle or satchel as a pillow. There are even royal records of kings traveling with entire bed ensembles. Mattress, sheets, pillows, bed curtains, and a wooden frame. All packed and carried by servants. Nothing says power like your own mobile bedroom. But back in your humble home, the bed is where it always is. In the corner, by the hearth, or pushed against a damp stone wall. It's not perfect, it's not plush, but it's yours. And as your eyes flutter closed again, your body curling into a position that avoids the sharpest straw stems, you let the scratchy, warm, imperfect comfort lull you back toward that delicious middle space between wake and sleep. The bed might rustle. It might itch. It might crawl just a little. But it's home. You've finally managed to drift off again, half curled on your lumpy straw mattress, wrapped in scratchy blankets, head jammed into a pillow that smells faintly of turnip. But then, you hear it, the distinct thunk-thunk of wooden heels. A door creaks, voices whisper, a fire hisses back to life. It's not a thief, it's not a priest, it's someone lighting a torch to go into the king's bedchamber. That's right. Tonight we're sleeping like royalty, or at least peeking in on how they did it. Because contrary to what you might think, sleeping like a king wasn't always better. In some ways, it was worse. Sure, their beds were fancier, but that didn't mean they were more comfortable. Let's set the scene. A royal bedchamber in the 14th century. The room is cavernous, the ceilings are high, the stone walls draped with tapestries to try and cut the chill. The fireplace crackles, but it's mostly for show. It can't compete with the draft leaking in through the shutters. There's incense burning, partly to cover the smell of chamber pots, partly to purify the air. Miasmas again. In the center of the room is a great bed, raised high on a wooden platform, four-postered with carved finials and thick velvet curtains. The mattress? Feather-stuffed? The sheets? Linen, maybe even silk if you're in France and feeling particularly bougie. There might be furs folded at the foot of the bed, because nothing says luxury like sleeping under a dead bear. But before you get too cozy, here's what you're not picturing. The audience. Royal bedchambers were not private retreats. They were workplaces. Court officials came and went. Trusted servants lingered. Sometimes even diplomats were brought in for early morning discussions. In fact, the ritual of the king rising was practically a theatrical production. You might open your eyes to a bishop standing 6 feet away holding your breeches and asking about naval policy. And the king wasn't even sleeping alone most nights. He might have a queen beside him, or a mistress, or a noble guest visiting from a far-off castle. If you were granted the honor of sleeping beside the king, it didn't necessarily mean anything scandalous. It was political, symbolic. You got to whisper into his ear before sleep took him. That's power. Historians still argue whether this practice was meant for intimacy, strategy, or just the show of favor. Probably all three. Either way, it meant the royal bed was rarely empty and rarely peaceful. Let's talk layers. A royal bed could include multiple mattresses, straw at the bottom, then wool, then feather. Over that, a thick bolster, sheets, quilts, furs, and finally a canopy. You didn't so much lie on it as burrow into it, but heat was still a problem. Even with all those layers, drafty castles got cold. Breathtakingly, toe-numbingly cold. Some nights, your breath would fog in front of your face. You'd shiver under 6 blankets and still feel the chill in your bones. Remember, stone is a terrible insulator, and tapestries only go so far. So what did royals do? They brought in bed warmers, metal, pans filled with embers, swished between the sheets before the king arrived. Occasionally, servants would warm stones in the fire and place them under the bedding. Sometimes they even pre-warmed servants, sending them under the covers to soak up the chill before the monarch got in. Talk about a job title. And speaking of servants, if you were really fancy, you didn't even undress yourself for bed. A valet or lady-in-waiting handled that. Royalty slept in linen nightshirts or robes, sometimes embroidered with initials or tiny heraldic symbols. Sleepwear wasn't just functional, it was part of the royal image. Here's a weird side note. There are accounts of kings refusing to lie flat while sleeping, believing that sitting half upright kept them healthier. Some used pillows or bolsters to prop themselves up, convinced that it prevented bad humors from settling in the chest. There's also evidence that some rulers only slept for a few hours at a time, waking often for prayer or work. Henry IV of France, for example, was said to wake every 3 hours to conduct state business. So, luxury? Sure. Restful? Not always. Even queens didn't get it easy. Many were expected to keep their chamber doors open during childbirth, and sometimes during sleep too, in case messengers arrived with urgent news, or worse, an army at the gates. Let's not forget, beds were political. They were sites of alliances, power plays, royal births, and royal deaths. When a monarch was on their deathbed, it literally meant they were lying in a ceremonial space, surrounded by courtiers, priests, physicians, and rivals, all watching for the final breath. It wasn't just sleep, it was a performance. And even in noble households slightly below royal rank, similar patterns played out. Wealthy lords and ladies had grand beds, often passed down through generations, decorated with carved symbols, religious motifs, or family crests. But again, these were shared spaces, not private ones. In fact, in some cultures, receiving guests in bed was a symbol of intimacy and trust. You might not even rise, you just scoot over and make room for someone to sit on the edge while discussing estate management, or the latest scandal about the bishop's son. Fringe tidbit? In some medieval inventories, beds were the most valuable item a person owned. More than land, more than silver. A really good bed could be worth a fortune, and bequested like treasure in a will. And yet, for all their grandeur, royal beds didn't keep out the bugs. Even kings had lice. Even queens swatted at fleas in the night. Even emperors scratched. So maybe, just maybe, your scratchy straw pallet back in the peasant hut isn't that much worse. At least you don't have a bishop standing at your footboard reciting the kingdom's grain shortage reports. So tonight, as you toss beneath your lumpy blanket, remember this. Whether you're a pig farmer or a prince, the night wraps around you just the same. Cold, itchy, uncomfortable, but deeply, undeniably human. And that's kind of beautiful, isn't it? It's the middle of the night. Again. But this time, you're not asleep. And neither is anyone else in your cottage. No, this is the sacred limbo between first sleep and second sleep. The hours when the world is still, but your mind is oddly alert. So what do? You do what any reasonable medieval sleeper would do. You get up, stretch, yawn, poke at the fire with a crooked stick. Maybe light a candle if you're fancy. Maybe not if you're afraid of burning the place down. Which happens, by the way, a lot. Welcome to the midnight interlude. That mysterious middle phase where the body rests but the soul wanders. And what you do now, that depends on who you are. If you're religious, and let's face it, most people in medieval Europe are, or are expected to be, you might kneel by the bed and murmur a few quiet night prayers. These aren't necessarily long, dramatic sessions. Just soft, practiced words whispered to the Virgin Mary, or maybe your local patron saint. Something to keep the demons away. Something to keep your soul in line. Monks, of course, take it further. Way further. They wake deliberately at this hour, pulling on their robes in near silence, feet scraping cold stone floors as they make their way to the chapel for matins, the night office. There, beneath flickering candlelight, they chant psalms into the darkness, their voices low and steady, echoing off damp walls. It's mesmerizing and slightly creepy, but it's also deeply calming. You, though, you're not a monk. You're a tired farmer, or a brewer, or the wife of a blacksmith who still has soot under her fingernails. So maybe during this midnight break, you nibble on a piece of stale bread left over from supper, or drink a bit of watered-down ale. Maybe check on the baby, or stoke the fire so the goat doesn't freeze to death. Or maybe you and your spouse exchange a few hushed words under the blankets. Just a quiet conversation, the kind that only happens when the rest of the world is sleeping. Some scholars believe this middle period was often a time for intimacy, not just physical, though that too, but emotional. Talking, confessing, sharing stories. This is when the day finally catches up to you, when the roles and chores fade and you remember that you are human, not just tired hands and sore feet. Others took this time to meditate on dreams. Dreams were serious business in the Middle Ages. You didn't just shake them off, they were messages, sometimes divine, sometimes devilish. A dream about running through water might mean impending birth. A dream about losing teeth? Definitely death or taxes. Same thing. Dream interpretation books were surprisingly common among educated folk. One popular text, the Somnial Danielis, was basically the medieval version of a dream dictionary. You dream of a goat? Good news. Prosperity. You dream of a snake? Bad news. Someone's plotting against you. Historians still argue whether people truly believed these interpretations or just enjoyed the ritual of trying to decode the strange images left in the mind's shadow. Either way, dreams weren't just nonsense. They were windows into something deeper. Now let's say you're in a town instead of the countryside. Midnight is when bakers begin to stir. They need hours to knead dough and get the ovens hot by dawn. You might hear the creak of wooden doors opening, the scrape of flour barrels, the quiet curses of someone who forgot to feed the starter. In cities, watchmen patrol the streets at this hour, calling out the time and weather. 3 o'clock and all's well, they might shout, just to reassure anyone awake, and to scare off thieves lurking in alleyways. And if you're a healer or a midwife, this might be the hour when someone bangs on your door, gasping that a birth is happening right now. You'd throw on a cloak and rush out into the night with herbs, bandages, and probably a strong stomach. Fringe fact? Some folks use this midnight break to write letters, accounts, personal reflections. There's something haunting and beautiful about candlelit scribes hunched over parchment at 2 a.m., dipping quills in ink while the rest of the house sleeps. Back in your bed, you've returned from the hearth. You've taken a sip of ale, maybe even a bite of dried apple chewed slowly in the dark. Someone nearby coughs. The chicken in the corner ruffles its feathers. You lie back down, pulling the blanket around your neck. You stare into the dark. The fire hisses again. And now it comes. The second sleep. Not as deep, not as restful, but dream-filled and strange. This is when visions float through your mind like fog. You see people you've never met, or places you'll never go. You hear music that doesn't exist. You wake sweating from a dream of drowning, or you laugh quietly in your sleep at something your dead grandmother just whispered. This part of the night is sacred, half lucid. You are not entirely in your body anymore, and soon, though you won't remember how or when, you'll drift off fully, disappearing again into the darkness, soothed by the rhythm of your own breath and the faintest, warmest glow from the hearth. Sleep at last takes hold, not in one perfect 8-hour stretch, but in 2 broken, beautiful pieces. Just like it did for everyone else. Noble, peasant, monk, or midwife, beneath the same stars, in the same silence, on beds stuffed with straw, wrapped in wool, listening for the rooster's crow that will always come too soon. You wake again just before dawn, heart racing. Not because of a noise, not because someone kicked you in their sleep, again. No, this time it was a dream. One of those vivid, flickering, half-real dreams that feels like it's stitched to your ribs. And in medieval Europe, that's no small thing. Because to the people of your time, dreams matter. Like, a lot. You don't just shake them off, you interpret them. You worry about them. You wonder who sent them. Was it God? A saint? A demon in disguise? See, in this world, dreams are messages. And the bed isn't just a place to rest, it's a gateway. You go to sleep not to shut down, but to receive. Visions, signs, warnings, hope. So when you roll over in the straw and whisper to yourself about that strange dream of flying over a flooded field, you're not just being dramatic. You're considering the consequences. And you're not alone. Medieval dream culture was incredibly rich. People across all walks of life, from scholars to shepherds, believed dreams were meaningful. Prophetic, even. There were dream books in circulation, handwritten or printed, that offered symbol translations. Dream of water? Might mean trouble ahead. Dream of a pig? Could be wealth or deceit. Dream of your teeth falling out. Sorry, someone close to you is about to die. Yes, we're still doing that one today. One popular text, the Dream Book of Daniel, claimed to trace dreams back to biblical times, decoding them like a medieval Google search. It was translated, adapted, and shared all over Europe. A peasant girl might hear bits of it from a traveling friar. A merchant might carry a copy in his trunk. A noblewoman might keep one in her chamber beside her prayer book. But it wasn't just quaint folklore. Theologians got in on the action. St. Augustine, St. Jerome, and later Thomas Aquinas all had opinions on dreams. Were they divine, demonic, random, a mix of all three? Aquinas believed dreams could come from 3 sources: God, nature, or the devil, and sorting out which was which. Yeah, good luck with that. Historians still argue whether medieval people really thought all dreams were divine, or if they just treated some as significant. But records show countless examples of people taking dreams seriously, changing travel plans, canceling weddings, even launching pilgrimages based on what they saw while sleeping. Let's not forget nightmares. They weren't just bad dreams. They were spiritual threats. There was a common medieval belief in incubi and succubi, demonic entities that visited people in their sleep. If you woke up breathless with a weight on your chest, that wasn't sleep apnea. That was a demon, sitting right on your ribs, stealing your energy, maybe more. People protected themselves with charms, herbs under the pillow, iron nails in the bed frame, crosses etched into the headboard, and prayers. Lots and lots of prayers. Because sleep, as comforting as it was, also made you vulnerable. Your body relaxed. Your soul wandered. You needed protection. Let's zoom into a monastery. Here a young monk lies on his narrow cot, wrapped in a thin blanket. The fire has gone out. His eyes are wide open. He's afraid to fall asleep again. The dream he just had? It was wrong. A woman's voice laughing. A glowing snake. Something burning. He'll confess it tomorrow to his abbot. Maybe it was a test. Maybe it was temptation. Maybe it was something worse. In some religious texts, even good people could be tormented in sleep, not because they were sinful, but because they were strong enough to resist. That was the logic, anyway. You're not cursed, you're chosen. Comforting, right? But not all dreams were doom and gloom. Many were considered gifts. Saints were known to appear in dreams, offering healing or advice. Martyrs whispered encouragement to the fearful. The Virgin Mary might cradle you gently in a dream, a symbol of protection. In fact, entire pilgrimage traditions were built around visions seen in dreams. One dreamer's story becoming the starting point of another's spiritual journey. There's even a famous medieval belief that sleep itself was a cousin of death. Not in a spooky way, more in a symbolic sense. The bed was your mini tomb. Lying down was surrendering the body. Waking up, a daily resurrection. This led to one of the most beautiful and slightly eerie medieval bedtime prayers. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake. Yeah, that one. It has roots going back centuries, even if the rhyme is more modern. And its meaning is clear: sleep is risky. Anything could happen. You might not wake up, which makes waking up kind of a miracle. Let's drop in a quirky belief here. Sleepwalking was considered supernatural. If someone wandered in their sleep, it wasn't chalked up to stress or neurology. It was witchcraft, or possession, or their soul wandering too far from the body. Parents sometimes tied bells to their children's, nightgowns to alert the household if they got up and started doing anything suspicious. Also useful for catching kids sneaking extra bread. And then there's lucid dreaming, something we think of as modern, but medieval texts actually reference. Some mystics believed trained dreamers could navigate their visions, speak with angels, and return with knowledge. A few even claimed to see heaven in their sleep. You, however, are just trying to get some rest. So as you lie back down, your body sore from a rough mattress, your blanket pulled tight, you try to ignore the weird dream still clinging to your brain. That one with the talking dog and the upside-down church. What could it mean? Who knows? But maybe, just maybe, someone is trying to tell you something. And as your eyes flutter shut again, the dream world rises up to meet you. Not a void, but a mirror. A language only your sleeping mind can speak. The sun hasn't fully risen yet, but you've already been awake. Twice. You've drifted in and out of strange dreams, whispered prayers, shifted around on your lumpy straw bed, and maybe even had a nibble of cold bread in the dark. So now what? Well, how about a nap? Yes, seriously, because in medieval Europe, sleep wasn't something that only happened once per night. Daytime sleep, especially in the form of naps, was a legit part of life. And for some, it was more than a guilty pleasure. It was practically a ritual. Let's start with the basics. In a world governed by sunlight and seasons, people's routines had to flex. When it was summer and daylight stretched for 16 hours, you rose early, worked hard, and often broke up the day with a short rest. In winter, when the sun barely peeked above the trees before retreating again, you might nap just to kill time between meals. But it wasn't just about filling hours. For certain classes and professions, naps were a mark of status or necessity. Let's talk monks again. These guys had their sleep split up even more than your average peasant. Between the divine offices, prayers, labor, and study, their nights were often broken into fragments. So, what did they do? They napped. Monastic schedules often included a short midday rest, especially in summer when the heat made work harder. Some abbeys even had specific rooms for it, dormitoriums, where monks could catch a brief, sacred snooze in the middle of their otherwise hyper-regulated day. Meanwhile, in noble households, siestas weren't just accepted, they were expected. If you were a well-to-do landowner or merchant in southern Europe, your afternoons probably involved retreating to a shaded room, closing the shutters, and curling up for a dignified nap while servants kept the children quiet and the wine from spilling. There's something decadent about it, sure, but also practical. Medieval medicine taught that sleep after eating helped the body digest. Modern science says, maybe not, but we're not here to ruin the vibe. The point is, a midday nap was seen as good for the humors. Balanced body, balanced mind. Historians still argue whether peasant laborers could nap. After all, when you're tied to the land and beholden to lords, it's not like you can clock out at 2 p.m. for a lie-down. But there's decent evidence that during harvest lulls, shepherds and field workers would sprawl in the shade and rest their eyes. You get up with the sun, sure, but you also know when to lay down. A charming fringe tidbit? Some medieval art shows workers sleeping with their tools, scythes, baskets, even flutes, suggesting that napping on the job wasn't unheard of, especially during slower months. Now, these weren't always full-on REM cycle naps. More often they were short dozes, 20 or 30 minutes, curled in a cloister corner or against a sun-warmed wall. You'd sleep just enough to reset the brain before chores resumed. And there was etiquette to it. In wealthier homes, you didn't just flop down anywhere. A proper nap had a location, maybe a chaise in the solar, or a curtained alcove off the main hall. You might even have a special robe for the occasion. Picture a nobleman slipping into a light embroidered overgown, removing his heavy boots and reclining just so with a silk pillow under his elbow. No snoring. Just a dignified rest. But let's not pretend everyone had that kind of luxury. In a cramped peasant cottage, nap time might just mean leaning back on a stool with your hood pulled down, praying the toddler doesn't throw a potato at your face while you drift off. Not elegant. Still effective. One unexpected place where naps were very serious business: universities. Medieval students were expected to memorize absurd amounts of information. Logic, Latin, law, and they did it while living in cold, overcrowded dorms, eating terrible food, and attending lectures that started before sunrise. No wonder many students were known for sleeping between classes, rolled up in their cloaks like academic burritos. And then there were feast day naps. You know how today everyone falls asleep after Thanksgiving dinner? Yeah. Same thing 700 years ago. After religious festivals, people often indulged in big meals followed by sprawling naps in odd corners. Barns, porches, grassy hillsides. If it was a feast day for a particularly sleepy saint, like St. Joseph, patron of workers and dreamers, you might even plan your nap in his honor. But, as always, not everyone approved. Some strict religious writers warned against excessive drowsing. Sleeping too much was sloth, one of the 7 deadly sins. Napping during Mass? Major faux pas? Falling asleep while reciting prayers? That got you extra penance. Still, most people didn't see rest as sinful. They saw it as natural. You worked hard. You rested when you could. You napped under trees and kitchens and bell towers on piles of wool, or beside your ox cart. Let's walk through one of those naps now. You're a weaver. You've spent the morning hunched over a loom, your fingers aching, your back tight. The midday bell tolls. You set your tools down. Your stomach is full of broth and rough brown bread. The fire crackles low. You slide onto a bench, lean back against the wall. Your hood is pulled low over your eyes. In the background, a child hums softly, spinning yarn. The sun warms your cheeks. Your breathing slows. Your body, exhausted, sinks into stillness. And for 15 minutes, maybe 20, you vanish. Into silence, into darkness, into dreams. No one disturbs you. No one questions it. Because here in this moment, sleep is sacred. Sleep is yours. You've barely been asleep 30 minutes when it starts again. The scratching, the shifting, the inner buzzing of a body that refuses to settle. You're tired. You're so tired, but sleep just won't come. Congratulations. You've officially joined the ranks of the medieval sleepless, and while they didn't have glowing screens or stress about credit card debt, insomnia was still very much a thing. Only instead of melatonin gummies or YouTube ASMR, your options were a little more, let's say, creative. Tonight we're diving into the weird, wonderful, and sometimes downright alarming cures for sleeplessness that medieval folks actually believed in. Let's begin with the least terrifying: herbs. If you couldn't sleep, the first stop was your kitchen garden. You or your village healer might brew a tea or make a sleep sachet with things like valerian root, poppy, lavender, or lettuce seeds. Yes, lettuce, like the salad. These were believed to calm the body and cool the blood, which was apparently essential for proper sleep. One 12th century remedy even suggested steeping lettuce in wine and drinking the concoction before bed. So basically, they invented sleepy time sangria. Then there's chamomile, of course, the classic. But in the Middle Ages, they also believed hyssop and betony could ease a troubled mind. If you were especially anxious, your healer might whip up a blend of herbs, sew them into a little linen pouch, and tell you to hang it over your bed or tie it around your neck. Fringe tip: some even stuffed herbs directly into their pillows. That way, every inhale during sleep was basically medieval aromatherapy. Still not sleeping? Time to escalate. Let's talk animal-based cures. Yes, animals. If plants didn't work, people turned to the creatures around them, and the remedies ranged from mildly odd to fully unhinged. One folk cure suggested rubbing a live toad on your chest if you couldn't sleep due to a heavy heart. The toad was believed to draw out the bad humors. Poor toad. Probably didn't sign up for that shift. Another remedy advised placing a wolf's tooth under your pillow, or even sleeping on the right side of a donkey's hide, because obviously donkey energy brings tranquility. Obviously. Now, if your insomnia was caused by nightmares, that was a whole different issue. The assumption was you weren't just sleepless, you were under spiritual attack, and for that you needed protection, not tea. You might be told to sleep with a crucifix or a carved piece of jet, a black fossilized wood thought to ward off evil. Or you might draw protective sigils in chalk above your bed frame. Some even hung bells near their heads, tiny ones to scare off spirits. If demons were making you sleepless, a little tinkling noise apparently did the trick. If things got really desperate, you went to a cunning woman, a local folk healer. She might write you a sleep charm on parchment, then roll it into a scroll to tuck under your mattress. She might whisper an incantation while circling your bed with a candle. She might even give you something truly cursed, like a powdered mole's foot, to put in your soup. Historians still argue whether these remedies were mostly placebo or if some had real calming effects. Certainly some of the herbs did. Valerian and poppy, for example, are known sedatives. But others, well, let's just say if someone's rubbing eel fat on your forehead, you're either going to fall asleep or pass out from confusion. Let's take a moment to talk about insomnia diagnoses. Doctors in the medieval period didn't talk about stress or anxiety the way we do. Instead, they blamed imbalanced humors, specifically too much choler or melancholy. These were hot and dry respectively, and they heated the blood, keeping you restless and agitated. The fix? Cool it down. Hence, all the cold herbs. Cold baths. Cold cloths on the forehead. Cold soup. Yes, soup again. There's even a medical text that advises mixing ground pearl, sugar, and rosewater into a thick paste to be eaten before bed to soothe the stomach and, by extension, the soul. If nothing else, it probably made you too full to pace the floorboards. Let's not forget rituals. Some people swore by rhythmic bedtime prayers. Others counted Ave Marias like modern people count sheep. Some scribes copied verses over and over, calming the mind through repetition. And for the wealthier insomniacs, they might commission a sleep charm from a scribe or cleric, a handwritten spell combining Latin phrases, saintly invocations, and symbolic illustrations, folded and placed beneath the mattress. The belief wasn't just in the words, it was in the ritual. The doing was half the cure. Quirky aside, one French noblewoman reportedly couldn't sleep unless she listened to someone read Latin aloud, even though she didn't understand a word. Just the rhythm of it, soft, echoing, ancient, lulled her to sleep. So basically, she invented the medieval sleep podcast. Of course, some nights nothing worked. You'd lie in bed listening to the wind press against the shutters. You'd shift, scratch, mutter a half-hearted prayer. You'd curse the goat for snoring louder than a monk during Lent. And you'd accept that tonight was just not your night. But you wouldn't panic. Not the way we do today. Because in the medieval world, sleep wasn't timed. There were no Fitbits tracking REM cycles. No clocks telling you to feel bad for still being awake at 2:43 a.m. If you were sleepless, you just waited. Stirred the fire. Watched the moon crawl across the beams. Whispered to the saints. Let your mind wander. And eventually, it would happen. Your breathing would slow. Your body would sink. And finally, after all the potions, prayers, and possibly amphibians, sleep would come. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but deeply. And for a little while, the world would disappear. You're not at home tonight. Not in your cottage, not in the hayloft, not even near your own bed. Instead, you're lying on a narrow wooden cot in a long, echoing hall, a medieval hospital. The walls are cool stone. The air smells of rosemary and something vaguely medicinal. There's a candle burning near your head, and beside it, a bowl of water with rose petals floating inside. You're not dying, you're just resting. Because here, sleep is medicine. Unlike the chaotic bustle of modern hospitals, medieval healing centers, especially in monasteries, treated sleep as the first, best, and sometimes only prescription. Long before pills and procedures, the cure for nearly everything started with one simple command: lie down and rest. Let's get one thing straight. Hospital didn't mean what it means today. These were almshouses, xenodochia, or infirmaries, often run by religious orders, and they weren't always for the seriously ill. Sometimes they were more like hostels for the soul, places where the sick, the elderly, the weary, and even travelers could stop, eat, pray, and sleep. And sleep, oh yes, was sacred here. Monastic hospitals were among the cleanest and calmest environments of the medieval world, mostly because they were run by monks and nuns obsessed with routine and cleanliness. They couldn't always fix your leg or cure your fever, but they could give you linen sheets, warm soup, and peace. Inside these places, the beds were spaced apart, sometimes with curtains, and there were rules. Silence was enforced. Light was minimal. Noise was forbidden after dark. If someone snored too loudly, the sister in charge might whisper a prayer and move them to the far end of the hall. Let's talk about the setup. You're lying in a cot that's not stuffed with straw, hallelujah, but with wooler down, depending on how nice the place is. Your bedding has probably been washed recently, a miracle in itself. The pillow is thin but clean. Your feet are warm. There's a jug of herb-infused water on a stool beside you. Chamomile, maybe, or meadowsweet. And someone, probably a nun, is gently adjusting your blanket while murmuring a prayer in Latin. This isn't just sleep. This is healing sleep. In many medical texts of the time, restorative sleep is prescribed like a potion. Let the patient lie quiet and warm, one reads. Do not trouble them with speech. Let them be in darkness. Medieval physicians believed sleep realigned the humors, cooled the blood, soothed the liver, and allowed the soul to rest close to God. They weren't entirely wrong, and in some ways they were ahead of us. Where modern medicine often ignores sleep in favor of lab work, the medievals saw it as central, the starting point of any recovery. Let's drop a fun fringe fact. Some monasteries had sleep rooms just for people who were emotionally overwhelmed. These weren't patients in the medical sense, but the heavy-hearted, the anxious, the grieving. People who just needed to lie down, breathe, and let their minds go quiet. Today, we'd call that a mental health break. Back then, it was seen as a spiritual tune-up. And guess what? You didn't have to be nobility to get this kind of care. Poorer folk were often admitted, especially during plagues, famines, or childbirth. The church believed that offering hospitality to the suffering was a sacred duty. So even if you smelled like sheep and had fleas in your cloak, if you showed up with a fever and a cough, the sisters made you a bed and gave you a bowl of lentil soup. Now, let's look at the other side of this. Sleep as punishment. Wait, what? Yep. In some religious contexts, forced sleep deprivation was used as penance. Monks who broke rules might be denied rest. Novices were sometimes kept awake to test their spiritual endurance. In extreme cases, saints in training would choose to sleep as little as possible, believing it brought them closer to God. There are records of mystics lying awake for nights on end, their eyes wide, waiting for visions. Some even slept on nails or stone floors, deliberately choosing discomfort as a form of humility. But let's be real. Most people weren't trying to ascend. They were just trying to not die of a cold. And if you were lucky enough to land a cot in a good almshouse, you'd be given a candle, a prayer, and the chance to sleep under a clean sheet for the first time in months. Let's walk through it. You're curled on your side. Your breathing has slowed. The pain in your knee is dulled by a warm poultice. A nurse has placed a cross near your pillow, not to frighten you, just as a reminder that you're not alone. Outside, a bell tolls softly. The wind tugs at the shutters, but the stone walls hold firm. Someone coughs in the far corner. A nun moves quietly down the aisle, her feet nearly silent. Your eyes close. You don't worry about rats or pigs tonight. You don't worry about the thatched roof leaking. You're not afraid of being jostled awake by someone trying to steal your shoes. Tonight, you're safe. And in that safety, you finally sleep. You are jolted out of your fragile sleep by a sound that could only mean one thing. A child is awake. And now, so are you. Because in the medieval household, your sleep isn't just your own. It's shared. Not just your bed, not just your blanket, but your space, your hours, your night. You're a player in an ensemble cast of sleepers, and some of them have tiny little elbows and a lot of nighttime energy. Tonight's sleep, it belongs to chaos. Let's start with kids. You might think bedtime was strict back then. Candles out at dusk, everyone tucked in. But honestly, bedtime was often more of a vibe than a rule. Children slept when adults did. Sometimes earlier, sometimes later, and almost always right beside you. In peasant homes, the whole family slept in one room. Parents, children, infants, maybe a grandparent or two. Everyone arranged themselves in whatever space they could find. Picture sardines, but itchier. There was no baby monitor. You were the monitor. If a child cried, you heard it. If they kicked, rolled, wet the bed, started babbling at the rafters, you felt every second of it. And depending on their age, they might also be squirming around with night terrors, which were thought to be caused by bad spirits or overexcitement from dinner. How did medieval parents handle it? Mostly by ignoring it, or rocking the child with one foot while still half asleep themselves, or handing them a crust of bread to suck on. Really. If the child kept waking everyone up, you might rub a bit of poppy syrup on their lips, a mildly narcotic brew used to help them sleep. Effective? Sometimes. Ethical? Don't ask. Historians still debate how much sleep anyone in a medieval household really got. Between the children, the animals, the fire that constantly needed tending, and the random passing monk knocking on the door at midnight looking for shelter, it's safe to say. Uninterrupted sleep was rare. Even noble homes weren't immune. Sure, the rich had more space, but they also had servants bustling in and out, wet nurses checking on infants, and often kept dogs and birds in the room, both of which liked to contribute sound effects. Plus, let's not forget the chores. Medieval life didn't pause at sundown. Bakers started work in the wee hours. Shepherds checked their flocks before dawn. And if a storm rolled in during the night, everyone was up, moving tools, covering grain, tying down shutters. Even when no one meant to wake you, the house was alive with creaks and clatters. Floorboards moaned. Wooden beams popped. The wind hissed through cracks. Someone snored. Someone mumbled a prayer. Someone farted. You're pretty sure it was the goat. And if your house had multiple floors, congratulations. Someone upstairs just knocked over a candle holder. Hope it wasn't lit. There were also early risers, people who got up before the second sleep even started. Cooks, watchmen, priests heading to chapel. You might be lying in bed, eyes closed, while someone 3 feet away is blowing on embers and rattling through a pile of iron pots. Privacy? You've never heard of her. One quirky fringe note. Some wealthier households actually staggered their servant shifts to avoid waking everyone at once. They knew mornings were chaotic, so instead of a full-on 5 a.m. housequake, you'd hear a soft crescendo. First the scullery maid, then the stable boy, then the washerwoman filling a basin in the yard. But in your home? In this drafty little cottage with 6 souls in one room? Everything happens at once. Let's set the scene. You're lying on your side, facing the wall. A child is curled up behind your knees. Another is wedged between you and your spouse, snoring softly with one arm flung across your chest. The fire has nearly died, but someone gets up to stoke it, loudly. The door creaks open as your neighbor's daughter slips in, asking to borrow an egg for the morning. She's barefoot and whispering, but it still sounds like thunder. A cat meows, a dog shuffles, a chicken rustles. Someone mutters about needing to relieve themselves. And you? You just lie there, accepting it all. Because this is normal. Medieval sleep wasn't solitary or sacred or silent. It was communal and loud and messy. And somehow people still managed to rest. Maybe not deeply, maybe not often, but enough. Because sleep, like everything else back then, was shared. You shared your blanket, you shared your mattress, you shared your nighttime air, thick with soot and animal breath and candle smoke. You shared your dreams, your murmurs, your coughs, your sighs. Even in monasteries where silence was prized and space was measured out by strict rules, monks still woke up to one another's rustles and breaths. Still shared the creak of their wooden cots. Still knew by the rhythm of sleep sounds in the dark who was there and who wasn't. Sleep was not a solo act, it was a chorus. Some sang, some snored. Some stayed quiet. But all of you were part of it. And as you roll over again, tucking the edge of the blanket under your chin, shifting a little one's foot off your stomach, you realize something else. It's not perfect. But it's warm, and it's familiar. And even though the room is full of noise and light and life, you're already drifting again, into the same sleep your ancestors drifted into. Surrounded, creaked at, bumped, and loved. You wake with a start. Not because of a dream, not because someone whispered your name, but because nature is calling, loudly. And now you face a very medieval dilemma. It's the middle of the night. It's cold, it's dark, and you really need to pee. Welcome to the nocturnal adventure that is, finding a place to relieve yourself in the Middle Ages. Let's set the mood. It's pitch black. No electricity, no nightlights, not even a reliable candle unless you risk waking someone up. And remember, candles are expensive. Every flicker is a coin on fire. So what do? Well, if you're lucky, there's a chamber pot under the bed. Chamber pots were a medieval staple, made of ceramic, metal, or even wood. They were as common as fire pokers. Every household had one, and they weren't glamorous. If you were a noble, yours might be decorated, maybe even gilded. If you were a peasant, it was whatever didn't leak. You'd slide it out from beneath the bed, hope it's empty, squat, and pray you don't tip it over. All this while half asleep and trying not to step on the dog, child, or goat. But if you weren't lucky, or if the pot was full or missing or recently broken, then congratulations. You're going outside. Into the cold, into the dark, into the mud. You throw on a cloak or blanket, shove your feet into boots maybe, and grope your way through the door. You step into the yard guided only by moonlight and sheer desperation. The air is cold and wet. You hear an owl, or something larger rustling in the bushes. Now you just hope you don't step in anything left behind by the livestock. And if you're a town dweller, there's the classic option of the privy, a little outhouse perched over a pit. Or, more alarmingly, if you live in a multi-story building, you might just tip your chamber pot out the window in the morning with a quick "Gardez l'eau." Watch out for the water. And hope for the best. Sanitation, not the Middle Ages' strong suit. Let's talk about the watchman now, because while you're stumbling through the dark to pee behind the woodpile, someone else is walking the streets, torch in hand, bell at hip. The night watch. These weren't exactly elite warriors, more like sleepy local guys with a torch and a loud voice. Their job? To patrol the streets, shout the time, and keep an eye out for fires, thieves, or lost drunkards. Every hour or so, they'd yell something like, 2 o'clock and all's well, just loud enough to jolt a few people awake and scare off anyone creeping around. But they weren't just neighborhood security. They were also your clock. In a world without wristwatches or alarm apps, these guys were your timekeepers. You'd drift in and out of sleep to the rhythm of their calls. 1 o'clock and raining. 3 o'clock and windy. It was oddly comforting, like a town-wide lullaby shouted by your dad's friend with bronchitis. In bigger cities, watchmen worked in shifts and walked specific routes. They carried staves and sometimes whistles. In smaller villages, the job rotated among able-bodied men. Nobody wanted night watch duty. It was cold, boring, and occasionally dangerous, but it came with a little coin and a lot of local gossip. Here's a strange fringe tidbit. In some towns, watchmen were tasked with recording who was up late at night. If a window had light too long after curfew, they might make note. Suspicious behavior? Witchcraft, maybe. Or just someone writing by candlelight. Either way, the watchman was watching. So now it's you, crouched behind the stable, doing your business under the stars, listening for the distant footsteps of the watch, and hoping you don't make eye contact with a very confused goat. There's no privacy, not really, but also no one's judging. This is just what you do, and it's not all grim. There's something weirdly peaceful about it. The cold night air on your skin, the rustle of trees, the hiss of your breath. The world feels ancient, close. Like you're sharing this moment with thousands of others across the countryside, all of them up for the same reason, all of them squinting in the dark, praying they don't trip. And once it's done, you go back inside. Quietly. Hopefully. You might rinse your hands in a basin of water by the door if you're fancy. More likely, you wipe them on your cloak and pretend it didn't happen. Back to bed you go. Careful not to step on the baby. Slide under the blanket. Settle against the straw. Someone mutters. Someone snores. Someone rolls over, pulling half the cover with them. And you lie there, listening. To the wind. To the breathing. To the faint cry of a rooster who thinks it's dawn. It's not. You still have time. So you close your eyes, and you sleep again. For now. You stir. Not because of noise this time, but because of a light. A cool pale beam slides across the floorboards. The edges of your blanket glow faintly. It's not firelight, not candlelight. It's the sky, changing gently, inch by inch, and now you can tell the season has shifted. Because how and when you sleep in the medieval world isn't just about beds or dreams or the kids kicking you in the ribs. It's about the calendar. Tonight's story is about seasonal sleep, how the length of night, the weight of weather, and the tilt of the earth itself shaped every breath you took in bed. Let's start in winter. Ah yes, winter, the medieval test of endurance. Nights are long, so long. Sunset at 4 p.m., sunrise at 8 a.m., that's 16 hours of darkness minimum. What do you do with all that time? You sleep, or try to, because medieval people didn't have things to do after dark. No Netflix, no late-night clubs, no blue light to keep their brains buzzing. When the light went, so did the day. So most folks went to bed soon after supper. Maybe 6 or 7 p.m. they'd sleep their first sleep. Remember that? Wake around midnight, maybe pray, maybe snack, then settle into their second sleep until morning. And yes, those two chunks could easily add up to 10 or 11 hours in bed, though not all of it was restful. And here's a weird little gem. In some parts of medieval Europe, winter sleep wasn't just longer, it was deeper. People reported heavier dreams, slower mornings, more soul-traveling, like the darkness tucked them in tighter. Monks even adjusted their prayer schedules to match. When the sun slept in, so did they, sometimes. But sleeping longer didn't mean more comfort. Winter meant cold and not the cute sweater weather kind. We're talking shiver yourself awake, frozen toes, ice in the wash basin cold. Remember, there's no insulation, no central heat, just your body, your blanket, and maybe a fire that went out hours ago. Some people even slept in shifts just to keep the fire alive. If you drew the short straw, you got up at midnight, shoved some half-burnt logs into the hearth, cursed your ancestors, and stumbled back to bed half-frozen. And then there were the blankets, or lack thereof. If you were rich, sure, you had wool and fur and heavy drapes. But if you were poor, you layered. Tunic over tunic, cloak over blanket, maybe even a sack. If it kept the heat in, it went on the pile. Let's not forget, entire families huddled together to share warmth. Parents, kids, grandparents, even animals. Everyone packed in like spoons in a drawer. Personal space didn't matter. Warmth did. And it wasn't just the night. Winter naps were common too. With the sun so shy, people often took short rests during the brief daylight hours, especially if the work was slow. It wasn't laziness, it was survival. But now the seasons shift. The days get longer. The air thaws. Spring arrives, messy and green. And sleep? Sleep gets shorter. Not immediately, but gradually. Come summer, your day starts earlier and ends later. If you're a peasant, this is your busy season. You're in the field before sunrise. You're still turning hay after sundown. Sleep becomes something you grab when you can. Historians still argue how much sleep the average medieval peasant got in summer. Some say it dropped to 5 or 6 hours total. Others think naps helped balance the deficit. Either way, it was a massive shift from winter hibernation. The sun rules your body now. There's light pouring through the cracks in the shutters at 4 a.m. Birds screaming at 5. Children running outside by 6. You might lie in bed, eyes half shut, trying to hold on to sleep. But the world is awake, and it's dragging you with it. And there's a particular kind of restlessness that comes with summer. The air is hot. The straw mattress is scratchier. You're sweating before the fire even dies. Mosquitoes buzz near your ear. The goat smells stronger. Everyone smells stronger. Sleep is lighter now. You toss and turn. You dream about rivers, shade, cold wells. You wake often trying to find a breeze. And yet, there's something magical about it too. Long days mean twilight naps. You might lie down in the early evening just as the sun starts to drop, the golden hour kissing your eyelids. You might rest after a feast day or a market trip or a long day in the fields. A short, sweaty, sun-dappled nap on a patch of moss. 15 minutes, maybe 20. Enough to keep going. The rhythm of the year shapes everything. Autumn brings balance. Mellow days and cooler nights. More sleep. Softer dreams. Winter swallows you whole, then slowly spits you out into the sticky brightness of spring. Then summer burns you awake again. Your body, like your bed, is seasonal. You adjust. You accept. You dream differently under snow than you do under stars. You curl tighter in January. You stretch wider in June. You sleep longer in November. You blink awake earlier in May. And every person around you, your spouse, your neighbor, the baker, the bishop, is going through the same strange transformation. Shaped not just by the sun, but by the stars. By temperature, by time, Even the animals feel it. The dog sighs more in winter. The chickens quiet down faster in summer. The cows change their grazing. The cat disappears for 3 days, then reappears on your chest at dawn like nothing happened. So tonight, as you lie there watching the silver light change color, you understand something strange and comforting. Sleep is not static. It moves, it stretches, it shifts. Just like the year, just like you. You're half awake and you know what's coming. It's not a dream, not the cold, not a snoring goat or someone stepping over your face to reach the fire. It's the rooster. You hear it in the distance at first. That ragged, self-important crock-a-doodle-doo, as if it's announcing the end of the world, instead of just another morning. Then another joins in, and then another, like feathered trumpeters signaling the final act of your medieval night. And just like that, the day begins. Because in the Middle Ages, there are no alarms, no clocks beeping from the nightstand, no smartphone buzz. Your wake-up call is natural, noisy, and unapologetic. Roosters, bells, hooves, children, church chimes, or the rising light of the sun itself, take your pick. One way or another, you're getting up. Let's walk through the medieval morning ritual, the sleepy-eyed stagger from bed to breakfast, from blanket to barn. First, you shift. Crack your joints. Rub the sleep from your eyes. If you're lucky, your blanket hasn't been stolen by your bedmate in the night. If you're very lucky, no one's peed in the corner. You sit up slowly. The air is cold, always cold, even in summer. You pull your cloak tighter, stretch your neck, and take a second to remember what century you're in. Then comes the washing. There's no hot shower waiting for you, no peppermint shampoo. Instead, there's a basin, a metal or clay bowl filled the night before with cold water. You splash your face, rub your hands, maybe wet your hair if you're feeling dramatic. Some folks keep a rag nearby. Some even add a few herbs, mint, thyme, or rose petals if they can afford them. But for most, it's just water. Just enough to wake up and wipe away the sweat, straw, and drool. If you're a monk, it's more formal. You wash your hands, face, and maybe feet in silence. You say a quick prayer, you don't rush. Mornings are sacred. A time to begin again. Now. Teeth. Yes, people clean them, sort of. Toothbrushes as we know them didn't exist, but people used chewing sticks, linen cloths, or rub their teeth with ash, salt, or sage leaves. Some even used crushed oyster shells or chalk. It sounds rough, and it was, but it got the job done. And after that, prayers. Even peasants, barely literate and bone-tired, would mutter a few words to the heavens. A paternoster, an Ave Maria. Just something to get the day started on the right foot. Then it's time to dress, or rather, redress. You likely slept in most of your clothes anyway. Now you just tighten your belt, wrap your cloak, pull your boots on if you have them. Maybe change your head covering, adjust your tunic. Make sure your knife is at your side and your coif isn't on backwards. If you're a noble or a merchant, a servant might bring your clothes. If you're a monk, your habit is folded in precise order at the foot of your cot. If you're a child, you might still be half naked, running barefoot and screaming because someone tried to brush your hair with a wooden comb. And now it's time for ritual. Not grand ones, small ones. The things you do every morning, tending the fire, opening the shutters, feeding the animals, saying a greeting to the bread dough that's been rising overnight, checking your shoes for spiders. Maybe you shake out the bedding, if you're noble. Maybe you just kick it into place and hope the fleas haven't multiplied too badly. Some folks light incense to drive out bad dreams. Others sprinkle blessed water on their pillows. A few mutter protective phrases as they fold their blankets. Superstition, religion, routine, it all blends together in the early morning haze. And now the bed itself. If you're wealthy, a servant might remake it. Fluff the featherbed, smooth the sheets, draw the curtains. If you're not, you do a quick shake of the blanket, kick the straw back into something resembling a rectangle, and call it a day. You might hang your pillow near the window to air it out. You might pat your mattress to knock out any unwanted critters. Either way, the bed returns to its day form, not sacred, not untouchable. Just another part of the furniture, because in the medieval world, beds are functional. You sleep, you wake, you move on. There's no snooze button, no checking your phone before getting up, just the push of sunlight, the call of the rooster, the rhythm of life. And as you leave the room, your night behind you, the last threads of your dreams dissolve like breath on a mirror. But for a moment, just a flicker, you pause. You look back. At the bed, at the straw, the wool, the half-lit space where you laid your head. And even though it's hard, even though it's drafty, crowded, itchy, and noisy, you'll return to it tonight, and the night after that, and you'll sleep. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not peacefully, but you'll sleep, like every person who came before you, like every soul who whispered dreams into the dark, like every child, monk, queen, and farmer. Sleep is sleep across the ages in every language. And somehow, in spite of it all, you got just enough. So now, as the sky outside your window begins to brighten and your own room, whatever century it's in, fills with that soft hush of morning, let your breath slow down again. Let your shoulders sink. Let your jaw unclench. You've traveled far tonight, not across distance, but through time, through candlelit halls and scratchy blankets, echoing chambers and low-walled cottages, all the way to the straw-filled quiet where sleep begins. You've shared your bed with strangers, goats, saints, fleas. You've watched the fire die and listened for bells. You've whispered prayers. You've gotten up to stoke the hearth or step out into the midnight cold with a full bladder and a grumble in your throat. You've napped like a monk, dozed like a noble, tossed and turned like a tired farmer with a rooster to blame. And through it all, you kept going. Not because sleep was perfect, but because it was yours. Now, as the final dream slips past, as the rooster crows one last time in the distance, you can feel the stillness of your own room pressing in like a warm blanket. Your bed isn't made of straw. You're not sleeping next to a pig. But you've touched something tonight, something quiet, something ancient. And with that, it's time to let go. Let the history drift away. Let the sounds fade out. Let your breath fall into rhythm, soft and steady, with the countless others who've slept before you. You're safe, you're warm, you're here. Sleep well.